We should talk about justice, different concepts of justice, moral justice, legal justice, and what you can call epochal justice, or what we understand as divine justice in this dunya. Now, moral justice, or what I'm calling moral justice, is basically a sentiment. It's a feeling that we have, the feeling, that you have when you suffer or when you witness what you perceive to be injustice, unfairness, harm or hurt or some kind of wrong. This originates in our fitrah. It's in our nature. It might be even subconsciously informed by an innate recognition of divine justice, meaning we're born with a sense of good and a sense of what is upright and natural behavior and a sense of our rights and responsibilities as human beings. So when something violates that, or when something happens that violates that, we have a visceral, emotional reaction. And I think that most of us tend to operate on this level. The emotional reaction to issues of justice and injustice is what prompts people to activism, prompts people to resistance and opposition, or to become involved, even to give charity and so on, or even to become militants or what have you. It's the sense of moral justice. But of course, this innate sense of justice also gets filtered through all of the add-ons of our personalities, our ego, our nefs, our self. It gets polluted and diluted by our own psyches, by our own interests, and our own learned or accrued biases and prejudices and so on. So this makes it incredibly subjective. It's variable and it's unstable. And it's always debatable. It can tend to lack balance or proportion, and it can be easily manipulated. So it's unreliable. The sense of moral justice is unreliable. And because it's unreliable, or anyway, this is one of the reasons, this is why we have laws. Legal justice. Legal justice represents the formalized system of laws, rules, that societies establish in order to govern behavior and to resolve disputes and so on. It aims to remove the subjectivity and personal emotion of moral justice from the administration of justice by enforcing clear rules with proportionate consequences. Generally laws are derived from a sort of consensus over time about what's right and what's wrong, what's fair and what's unfair and so forth, and about how best to keep order in the society and stability. It isn't ambiguous. It's predictable and it's fixed. Now, it's obviously imperfect and it can be meddled with, it can be manipulated, but this is less the case than with so-called moral justice. It can conflict with any individual's sentiments about right and wrong, and not everyone is going to be satisfied with the outcome of legal justice. But it's much easier to prove that a law has been broken than it is to prove that an action is unambiguously and unanimously regarded as unjust, objectively. So when we're talking about Israel, for example, when you're talking about Israel-Palestine, for example, you'll notice that they always try to keep the conversation, or they always try to veer the conversation towards subjective senses of moral justice, like, do you condemn Hamas and so forth? This is irrelevant. And in fact, both sides do it. We focus on the evil of Israel's actions rather than on the illegality. And that's exactly the way that the Zionists want the conversation to be, because it is subjective. As long as it's a subjective dispute, it goes nowhere. It's just everyone has their own opinion and so on. But if you're talking about the law, it's incredibly clear. If the legal frameworks that the world claims to uphold, international law, were to be enforced on Israel the way that it's enforced against other nations, well, there would be no ambiguity whatsoever.
Hey, yo, what's up, fam? How you doing? Hope you're doing super great from wherever you're watching us from. As you know, this is a presenter, Ginger Stories, and I'm hoping that you are fine. In today's video, we are going to talk about something so critical, often overlooked. The Americans, the moral grounds that America have, what is called selective morality, right? The United States practices what is called selective morality. Morality to them, it depends on how they feel it's moral or not. What's not moral can be moral to them. What's moral cannot be moral to them at the same time, because of its intervention that has been always shown to the world. Now, this contradiction that the US have often showed is called instrumental morality. It is morality that only serves them. It is a morality that is only good in their face. Because of that, they have used their power also they have used the geopolitical power to make other people suffer. Now, in today's video, I'm going to be addressing somebody important called Shahid Bolsen. For those who have heard him, he's called Shahid Bolsen from the Middle Nation. Shahid Bolsen is a critical voice in the global geopolitics, and he has frequently argued that the United States bears a significant responsibility for instigating chaos and distractions in various parts of the world, particularly in Palestine and across numerous African nations. His critique extends beyond a mere political analysis, jumping into philosophical and ethical frameworks that underpin Americans' foreign policies. The central to his argument is the exploration of different types of morality, being it political, economical, and legal morality, and how they have manipulated to justify oppression and exploitation. Bolsen also contends that while America's portrayal itself as a beacon of moral leadership, its actions reflect a deeply entrenched hypocrisy, wherein morality is selectively applied to serve the strategies of the interest of people. Now, it's always important to understand how the United States have played these cards very well. As I said, they apply what is called moral pragmatism. It is a morality that, to them, it's only morality if it serves them, right? They practice what is called the moral pragmatism. If it only serves them a purpose, now that's moral to them. But if it doesn't serve them, that's not moral to them. I want us to watch this video. It is so eye-opening. It is so critical to the things that most of us should be asking or should be questioning the Americas. Because look from history. When you look at people like DRC, when you look at things that happened in, take an example, things that happened in Libya, for example, the regime of Muammar Gaddafi, whose hands played that role. Right now, we question what is called morality. I want us to watch this video. It's really important. It's really eye-opening. It will give you a perspective that I feel like you need to listen, and I think we should have open discussion for this. So those who are watching us for the first time, welcome. For those who wish to support me, kindly check out my Cash App. It's on my bio. You could send me super thanks. I'll highly appreciate. But until then, let's watch the video. Let's learn first. That's the most important thing.
About this situation. This isn't speculation. This is not opinion. This is simply what the law states. This is what the law dictates. So, for example, there would never even be any question about an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. In fact, an unconditional ceasefire would have been imposed on Israel. Under the Fourth Geneva Convention, collective punishment, indiscriminate bombing, and targeting of civilians, these are war crimes. Meanwhile, this is exactly how Israel has conducted its military campaign in Gaza. That's literally their approach. Entire families wiped out, hospitals bombed, food supplies blocked, and so on. Okay, these are not just tragedies. These are crimes under the law. And it's not ambiguous, and it's not open to debate. It's literally what they have been doing. And of course, by law, the occupation itself is illegal. Israel must withdraw under the law. Again, that's not an opinion. United Nations Security Council Resolution 242 demanded that Israel withdraw from the territories that it occupied in 1967. That was nearly 60 years ago. The occupation is illegal under Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which explicitly prohibits any occupying power from transferring its own population into the occupied land. By every settlement in the West Bank and East Jerusalem is a war crime. This is not an opinion. If international law were applied, then all of Israel's settlers would be forcibly removed. The Israeli military presence in the West Bank would have to end immediately, and Palestine would have full control over its land, because that's the law. For over 17 years, the Gaza Strip has been under siege. Israel controls its borders, its airspace, its coastline. Again, the Fourth Geneva Convention makes it very crystal clear. Blockading a civilian population, depriving them of food, depriving them of water, depriving them of medicine, depriving them of energy, these are war crimes. The UN has described Gaza as an open-air prison, as we all know. The International Criminal Court has already stated that the blockade of Gaza is a crime against humanity. According to international law, Israel should be compelled to lift the siege against Gaza immediately, not an opinion. We don't need more investigations. We don't need more reports. The evidence of war crimes is overwhelming. Hospitals bombed, entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, journalists, doctors, children killed in indiscriminate airstrikes. Under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, these are not just military actions. Again, they are crimes. Israeli leaders, Netanyahu, Gallant, and others, every general who has ordered attacks on civilians should be indicted and prosecuted at the International Criminal Court. Under universal jurisdiction, any country could arrest Israeli officials and hold them accountable. The forced displacement of Palestinians is not just a moral outrage, it's a violation of international law. UN Resolution 194 guarantees the right of return for refugees to their homes. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights enshrines the rights of all people to return to their homeland. Yet Palestinians are denied this right, while Israel brings in settlers from all across the world. That's against the law, period, not an opinion. Palestinian refugees should be allowed to return home, and Israel should be required to compensate those who have suffered generations upon generations of displacement, because that's the law. I mean, what happened when Russia annexed Crimea? Immediate sanctions. What happened when Iraq invaded Kuwait? Well, there was a full-scale international military response. What happened when South Africa was under apartheid? A global movement of boycotts, a global movement of divestment and sanctions. Yet when Israel violates every principle of international law, instead of being punished, it's rewarded with billions of dollars, billions in military aid, billions in trade agreements, and diplomatic protection. Well, this is the double standard. If international law were to be applied fairly, Israel would face a total arms embargo. All economic and military ties would be severed until it complied with the law. So again, you can have whatever opinion you want to have about this, but it is the law. If your opinion does not align with the law, well, this is where you prove whether or not you want to belong to the law-abiding nations of the civilized world, or you want to be an outlaw, you want to be a renegade, you want to be a criminal. This is where that becomes clear, because look, you can agree or not agree, but when it comes to the law, you're supposed to adhere to it either way. Israel's violations of international law are not just about crimes of war, they're about preventing the very existence of Palestine. But the law, again, is clear. Palestine has a right to statehood under UN Security Council Resolution 242 and 338. Palestine is entitled to sovereignty. Under the ICJ's ruling in 2004, Israel's wall in the West Bank is illegal and Palestinian land must be returned. These are not opinions. This is legal justice. Under the law, Palestine should be immediately recognized as a fully independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital. There should be no negotiations on this. In fact, just enforcement of the law. Understand, none of this is radical. None of this is controversial. It's simply what international law demands. It's what international law states. And we should always focus on this when we talk about Palestine, when we talk about Israel. In my opinion, we should focus on legal justice instead of on moral justice. Again, under international law, Israeli leaders should be prosecuted for war crimes. Israel should withdraw from all occupied Palestine. The Gaza blockade should end immediately. Palestinian refugees should be returned to their homes. Israel should face global sanctions and economic pressure until they comply, and a Palestinian state should be fully established. All of this is well established. All of this is understood, and all of this is accepted by everyone in the world except by the ones who are breaking the law. The ones who are breaking the law don't want to talk about the law. Instead, they want to talk about subjective, emotional, and ambiguous, debatable interpretations of right and wrong, and justifications for what they do, and so forth. They want to keep the discussion in the realm of opinion, when in fact opinion is irrelevant in any matter where the law is clear. Opinion is irrelevant in any matter where the law is clear. That's the thing. Where there's a law, when legal justice exists on something, then there is no point in arguing about anyone's subjective sense of moral justice, because we've all agreed to abide by the law. You understand? We have all agreed to adhere to the law. And as Muslims, we have a religious obligation to abide by the agreements, by the treaties and the contracts and so forth that we have signed. Now, the people who wrote these laws, who wrote these treaties, are continuously themselves breaking the treaties, breaking the agreements. But we genuinely believe in the rule of law. As Muslims, we genuinely believe that agreements are binding. And like I said, violating or breaching an agreement is much easier to prove than trying to convince someone about the morality or the immorality of an action. So you see the difference between moral justice, or a subjective sense of justice, a sentiment, a feeling, an emotion about what's right, an emotion about what's wrong, as opposed to legal justice. Legal justice is more cut and dry. I remember when I was a little kid in school, we had a classroom court system where we had students assigned as police who would give any kid in class a ticket if they broke a classroom rule. And then every Friday, we would have court. You had a student who was assigned the role of the judge, and you had a student who was assigned the role of a defense advocate, and so on. And the issue of their rule breaking would be addressed in a sort of mock trial every Friday. I was the classroom prosecutor. So when someone threw trash on the floor, or so-and-so was chewing gum or what have you, whatever the case may be, I would be the one to prosecute that. So the defense advocate or the kid himself would come up with all sorts of reasons why they did what they did, why they broke the rule, which to my thinking was just an admission of guilt. Case closed. Khalas. You broke the rule. Your reasons are irrelevant. How you feel about it is irrelevant. The rule is the rule, and you did not follow the rule. Case closed. And I never lost, because it's clear cut. See, once you have agreed to the rules, you are bound by the rules. So yes, you should scrutinize the rules very carefully before you agree to them. Now, America, and obviously Israel, they never had to scrutinize any of the rules, because they never expected to be bound by the rules. They only expected the rules to only ever be applied and to only ever be enforced on everyone else. But no, the rules are the rules, and when you break the rules, it's clear, and there's nothing dubious about it. Now, in a dispute, the judge can decide whether to grant clemency or leniency or what have you, but clemency or pardon or leniency or any of these types of measures cannot be granted to anyone before trial. There may be mitigating circumstances and so on, but that has nothing to do with the establishment of the fact of lawbreaking. Do you see what I mean? And this should not be a foreign concept for Jews. Religious Jews are very much about the law. They understand the concept of the rule of law very well. And obviously so do we. So do Muslims. There's no people on the face of the earth who understand the rule of law more than Muslims, in fact. Legality and jurisprudence are major defining aspects of our religion. And this brings us to the issue of divine law, or epochal justice. What I mean by that is the embedded system of balance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has built into creation. That's what justice is really about. It's about balance. It's about restoring balance when the actions of people or the actions of nations have caused an imbalance. And this balancing is inescapable. Even if it comes over the course of generations, balance will be restored. You have this idea about how the sins of the father will not be visited upon the son. But I think that you misapply this idea. Because what we're talking about, again, is balance. Or you can think of it in terms of debt. When you do wrong, when you take someone's right, well, you incur a debt. You are in debt to that person or to those people whom you have wronged. And that debt must be paid. And it will be paid willingly or unwillingly. And yes, if you die in that debt, the debt isn't canceled. Your debt will be collected from your descendants. And that applies on the level of nations just as it applies on the level of individuals. This is something, again, that we as Muslims understand very well. No one gets away with anything, period. No one gets away with anything. There's a fascinating hadith in which all three concepts of justice overlap: the moral justice, the legal justice, and divine justice. Rasulullah ﷺ said, sometimes you people come to me with your disputes, and one of you may be more eloquent or more persuasive than the other. And so I may judge in his favor because of this, because of his eloquence, because his argumentation is so persuasive. And by judging in his favor, I may give him a right that's not his right. So basically, beware of accepting a judgment which gives you what you have no right to have. Because if I judge in your favor and you're in the wrong, then I'm only judging on your behalf and giving you a piece of the fire. In other words, don't let your subjective sense of moral justice cause you to demand what isn't your right to demand through legal justice. Because in so doing, you may put yourself on the wrong side of divine justice. And every form of justice is flawed except for this. So take that seriously. Take that very seriously. This should be a restraining factor on your volatile sense of moral justice. And it should be a consideration when you're dealing with legal justice. So the most important thing is always going to be to try to be on the right side of divine justice. Because if you're not only putting yourself in debt, but you are potentially betraying your own descendants for generations to come. Because they will experience the rebalancing of what you and your people put out of balance. Please understand me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us against a fitna, an affliction, a tribulation, a strife, or what have you, that will not only afflict those among us who do wrong, but will afflict everyone writ large. And that happens when the people do not immediately and urgently try to prevent each other from committing actions that put the balance of justice out of kilter. You have allowed the balance to become so imbalanced, so lopsided, so skewed. You have allowed even just a few of your people to do that, such that now everyone has to go through the rebalancing, even though they themselves did not commit the actions that caused the imbalance. You understand? So literally, if you care about your children, if you care about your grandchildren, then you have to do all that you possibly can do today, to make sure that your generation is just, to make sure that you do not bequeath to your offspring and to their offspring a debt of wrongdoing, a debt of imbalance, a debt of injustice that they will have to pay. Otherwise, I'm telling you, you are betraying your own unborn descendants. And again, I know that this is something that the Jews must understand. After all their centuries of experience, they have seen with their own eyes and they have felt with their own lives the reality of epochal justice. They have strayed and been disciplined. They have disobeyed and been punished. They have done wrong and they have been chastised over and over again. And their whole book is a chronicle of this phenomenon. Why their whole history is nothing but a testament to this reality. So they know this. They know this very well. They know this just as surely as we do, that no one gets away with anything. Even their enemies who transgressed against them, whether it's Fir'aun or whether it's the Nazis. I mean, look at how pathetic the state of Germany is today. The whole of Europe used to tremble at the terrible power of the Third Reich. Now Germany is a laughingstock today, and it's killing itself by 1,000 cuts in front of the whole world. Wallahi, divine justice is real, and it's inescapable, whether you're on the right side of it or the wrong side of it. Allah will balance out the scales of justice, even across generations. The Jews know this, and they know that what they're doing in Palestine right now is doing nothing but earn their own progeny hardship and misery. You can't possibly be that blind to history and that ignorant about your own book and the chronicles of your own people. I mean, you know perfectly well that you are actually condemning yourselves and condemning your own descendants by the injustice that you're committing in Gaza, the injustice that you're committing in the West Bank, in Lebanon, in Syria, and so on. The Jews know this perfectly well, wallahi. You are sentencing your children and your children's children to a debt that they will have to pay because of your actions. You know this because it is a pattern that plays out again and again across your history. I mean, it plays out again and again across all of human history, but you wrote it all down. And you supposedly study it. You supposedly study the history of your particular people, so you have no excuse. When you have done wrong in the past, you have faced the consequences. And when you have been wrong, well, consequences have struck those who have wronged you. That's what your whole book is about. And you know very well that what you're doing today in Gaza is wrong. And you know that you've been wrong for a whole century in Palestine. And the consequences are going to be inescapable, just as they always are. For you, just as they are inescapable for everyone else. And no, I'm not forgetting about America. The same applies to you. The same applies to America. You're not getting away with anything either. I mean, do you really believe that you got away with the genocide of the Native Americans? Do you really think that you got away with chattel slavery? Do you really think that you got away with the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? You think you got away with that? Do you really think that you're getting away right now with the genocide in Gaza that you're enabling? Every single thing that you have done, every grotesque injustice that you have committed as a nation is going to fall upon your heads. In fact, it's already happening. Oh, it's an evil nation that tells its people that there's never going to be a reckoning. It's an evil nation that tells their own people that they're above the law, that tells them that they're unaccountable, that tells them that they will never face the consequences of their actions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Anbiya about the fate of all of those nations who wielded injustice as their weapon and who thought themselves to be immune to accountability. All those nations before who persisted in their crimes until the punishment was upon them. And when the punishment came, they fled, or they tried to flee. And Allah told them, don't flee. Return to your homes, return to your luxuries where you used to live so that you can be questioned. But then when it was too late, when their doom was already sealed, then they cried out, woe to us. Indeed, we were the wrongdoers. You know, I had a post on TikTok the other day, an excerpt from a recent video where I proposed the idea that the American citizens should be allowed to sell their citizenship to foreigners for money. So then they could take that money and escape from the United States and go somewhere else and get out of that country. You know, within minutes, that post had tens of thousands of views, tens of thousands of likes, shares, and comments. And almost all of the comments were from Americans saying that they would sell their citizenship in a heartbeat. And they'd be on the next flight out if they could get out of America. They wouldn't look back. They'd say they'd leave with just the clothes that they had on their back. Because this is fleeing from the punishment that they know is descending on that country. You were warned when you slaughtered the Native Americans of that land and built your empire on their bones. You were warned when you enslaved millions of Africans, stripped them of their humanity and treated them like commodities. You've been warned when you waged wars of conquest, when you funded dictatorships, when you propped up apartheid regimes, when you crushed entire economies to maintain your dominance. You were warned when you supported the occupation of Palestine, when you armed the murderers of children, when you justified genocide and you justified ethnic cleansing as self-defense. For generations, you've played God upon the earth, believing yourselves to be above consequences, believing yourselves to be above judgment, above retribution. You thought that justice was something that you could impose upon others, but never something that could be imposed upon you. And listen, understand, your problems, your wrongs are not mistakes. No one forced you to commit those crimes. You know, no one put a gun to your head and forced you to treat other human beings like livestock. The racial problem in America wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misstep. Do you understand? It was a deliberate, created injustice. You created this problem, and you worked hard to create this problem. You didn't just hate African people. You concocted a whole quasi-scientific rationale to justify it. You willfully interpreted your religious text to try to justify it. You built a complex propaganda, indoctrination, brainwashing, miseducation system to try to implant it into the minds of your people, to reinforce the evil. Do you understand? You did this with commitment. You worked diligently, relentlessly, and invested massive energy, time, money, intellect, and effort to enforce, to maintain, and to preserve the injustice you created. And you created an economic system, a machine for managing your economy through war, through torture, through maiming, crippling, killing, and carnage. No one made you do that. You chose to do that. And you maintain and defend that system until today. You can't just say, oops, and let's move on. You have never addressed what it is about you that made you choose to do these things, that made you create these injustices, that made you systematize these injustices and protect them for decades upon decades. It's like a degenerate gambler, addicted to gambling. And he thinks that if he can find some kind of way to pay off his debts, if he can find some way to get his house from being foreclosed, it means he solved his problem. No, his problem is his addiction to gambling. So America, you have never addressed what is internally wrong with your culture, with your so-called civilization that has made you do these things, that has made you do the things that you have done. Not to mention, like I said, you have never actually ever even stopped doing those things. But you think that if you can just keep kicking the can of consequences down the road, then you never have to change. This is what you think. You think that you're succeeding. You think that your way is working. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that He did not create the heavens and the earth and everything that is in between them, in play, in jest, in amusement. The world is not a playground for your power. The world is a stage for divine justice. The laws of history are not written by your institutions. They are decreed by the one who governs the cosmos. And when the balance is broken, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala restores it through whatever means necessary. And now, America, you're beginning to see the consequences in America. The cracks in your empire are showing. Your economy is crumbling under the weight of its own corruption. Your political system is paralyzed. It's been hijacked by oligarchs. Your streets are filled with rage and division and despair. You're witnessing the slow dismantling of the very power that you wielded against others. Now you cry out, woe to us, indeed we were wrongdoers. But it's too late. You failed to make amends. You failed to atone. You failed to repent. Instead, you doubled down on your tyranny. You waged new wars. You funded new massacres. You armed new oppressors. You stood by and cheered as Gaza was burned to the ground, as hospitals were bombed, as mothers cradled their dead children in their arms. And you called all of this security. You called all of this defense. But what it is in reality is the final chapter of your arrogance before the punishment. And now the rebalancing has begun. Allah said we hurl the truth against falsehood and it crushes it, so it vanishes. So woe to you for what you describe. The balance of the world is shifting. The oppressed are rising. The global order that you enforce through lies, through carnage, and through exploitation, it's disintegrating. Your arrogance has sealed your fate. And now the truth that you suppressed is crashing down upon you. For the believers, for the Muslims, this is a reminder. The justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is inevitable. The powerful nations that commit oppression are not invincible. They're not immune. They're just waiting for their reckoning. And for those people who still stand with injustice, return to your homes, return to your luxuries, return to your comforts.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope you're super great. I hope you are, Mr. Shahid Bolson gave a perspective that it's important for us to get to understand and to learn and see how these things unravel themselves. And somebody said that, they are clean and they don't have any dirt. Well, they try to remove that from other people's eyes while theirs is full. That's the definition of United States. So the illusion of moral superiority in foreign policy. You need to know that Shahid Bolson challenges the prevailing narrative that America operates as a force for good in global affairs. He argues that the U.S. foreign policy is often framed in moralistic language, emphasizing democracy, human rights, and freedom. Yet in practice, the contradiction between proclaimed values and actual conduct is evident in the U.S. Take a stance on Palestine. While American leaders claim to support peace and stability, they provide unwavering military and financial support to Israel, facilitating the systematic oppression of Palestinians. The contradiction exposes what Bolson identifies as instrumental morality, right, where moral principles are employed selectively to imperial interest. right? So you need to also know that. Second thing that he also talks about that is important is the weaponizing of legal morality. Bolton also critiques how America manipulates legal morality, the use of laws and legal frameworks to legitimize unethical actions. For instance, while the US frequently invokes international law to condemn adversaries like what's happening in Russia or Iran, it consistently shields its own allies from accountability. In the case of Palestine also, American vetoes UN resolution that seek justice for Palestinians victims while simultaneously punishing other nations for alleged human rights abuse. This double standard reveals that legal morality is not rooted in universal justice, but instead wielded as a political weapon to maintain global economy or global hegemony. Also, the third thing that he talks about that I feel that it's important is the economic morality of exploitation. Another key aspect of Bolton's critique is the concept of economic morality, which he describes as the ethical framework that governs financial and economic decisions at the global scale. The United States, through institutions like the International Monetary Fund, that's the IMF and the World Bank, imposes economic policies on African and other developing nations that entrench dependency rather than foster genuine development under the guise of promoting economic stability. These institutions implement austerity measures, privatization and debt structures that strips notions of sovereignty. Bolton also argues that economic morality as applied by America is essentially a justification for neocolonial exploitation. So that's another thing that we also need to look about, because try to think about how they have used these monetary bodies like the IMF and the World Bank to push some policies, even over here in Africa. This is something that happens sometimes, and Africans didn't accept it so well, so it had a lot of protest and a lot of resentment until they decided to give up. But I still believe that they're still pushing these policies in these other countries. Also, it talks about political morality as a justification for regime change. Bolton highlights how America frequently employs political morality to rationalize regime change operations in countries that resist Western dominance. Whether in Libya, Iraq, or Venezuela, the US presents or protecting human rights. However, the underlying motive is often securing economic resources or geopolitical influence. Libya serves as a prime example. Muammar Gaddafi's leadership was demonized on moral grounds, yet his removal led to chaos, warlordism, and the resurgence of slave markets. This demonstrates that political morality is often nothing more than convenient pretext for imperialists' ambitions. Also, he goes ahead and talks about the destruction of social morality in African nations. Bolton further explores how Americans' action disrupts social morality, the ethical fabric that holds society together, by engineering conflicts, arming rebel groups, and destabilizing governments. The use of systematically eroded communal structures and the national unity in African countries, nations such as the Democratic Republic of Congo and Somalia, have suffered prolonged conflicts fueled by American-backed interventions, leading to societal fragmentation and economic ruin. This destruction of social morality leaves nations in perpetual crisis, ensuring they remain subservient to Western interests. So that's what happens, and that's how it goes. He also talks about the ethical hypocrisy of counterterrorism policies. One of the most glaring contradictions in American moral posturing, according to Bolton, is found in its counterterrorism policies. While the US portrays itself as the champion against global terrorism, it has actively funded and armed extremist groups when it served strategic goals, from supporting the Mujahideen in Afghanistan during the Cold War, to providing arms to radical functions in Syria. American policies exposes a moral pragmatism that American policy exposes a moral pragmatism that disregards the long-term consequences of empowering violent actors. This selects morality further erodes the credibility of African foreign policies, as it becomes evident that terrorism is only condemned when it threatens Western interests, right? We also talk about the corporate morality and the role of multinational companies. Bolton also critiques our corporate morality, or the ethical standards governing multinational corporations, is aligned with American geopolitics objectives. Many American companies exploit African nations by extracting natural resources without investing in local economies. The US government often supports these corporate interests through military interventions and political influence. For example, the exploitation of coltan, a mineral crucial for electronics, has fueled conflicts in Democratic Republic of Congo, with American corporations profiting from the suffering of local populations. This corporate-driven form of morality prioritizes profit over human dignity. Also, we talk about the psychological morality of manufactured consent. A crucial aspect of Bolton's analysis in the concept of psychological morality is wherein public perception is manipulated to accept moral contradictions. In policy, through media propaganda and selective reporting in the US justifies actions that would otherwise be considered immoral. The mainstream narrative paints America as a defender of human rights while concealing its role in war crimes, coup, and economic exploitation. Also, Bolton argues that this form of morality contradicts the global population to accept moral inconsistencies as logical and necessary. He also talks about the role of religious morality in justifying oppression. Bolton also examines how religious morality is co-opted to justify oppression, particularly in relation to Palestine, Christian Zionism, and movement that fuses evangelical Christianity with unconditional support for Israel, has been instrumental in shaping the U.S. policy in the region. Many African leaders under the influence of Christian Zionist beliefs argues that Israel has a divine right to land, ignoring the suffering of Palestinians. The religious framed morality transforms colonialism into a sacred duty, further entrenching injustices under the guise of faith. Also, there's something that he ends the conversation by saying, a call for ethical consistency in the global affairs. Ultimately, Bolton's critique is called for ethical consistency, a morality that applies universally rather than selectively. He urges that nations and individuals should reject America's self-serving moral framework and instead adopt principles rooted in genuine justice and equality. True morality, he argues, cannot be contingent on political alliances, economic interest, or strategic advantages by exposing Americans' manipulation to different moralities. Bolton seeking to awaken global consciousness and inspire resistance against the systems of oppression that continues to shape the world affairs. These are Presenter Agent Stories, and I'm hoping to see you in my next video. For those who are watching us for the first time, stay blessed, happy, and I hope to see you on my next video. But until then, peace, love, and harmony. Salam.